Welcome to the channel, dear travelers of Middle-earth. Today, we embark on a journey to one of the most poignant and mystical realms in all of Tolkien's legendarium, the Grey Havens. Known in Sindarin as Mythland, this ancient port stands as the final threshold between Middle-earth and the undying lands of Valinor. Here, the straight road begins, carrying elves, ring-bearers, and other chosen few across the sundering seas. But why does this place evoke such deep sorrow and hope? What ancient history lingers in its waves, and what does it truly mean to set sail from these blessed shores? Let us wander together into the heart of this farewell. To understand the significance of the Grey Havens, we must first turn back the pages of history to the very beginning. Founded in S. 750 by Gil-galad, the last High King of the Noldor, Mythland rose after the tragic downfall of Eregion and the forging of the Rings of Power. Built upon the Gulf of Lyn in Lindon, it was established by Círdan the Shipwright, a figure of quiet wisdom and ancient memory, who even by the end of the Third Age had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires. Círdan was among the first elves to awaken by the waters of Cuivanen in the distant First Age, and his enduring purpose was to guide his kin back across the sea to the Blessed Realm when their time in Middle-earth had passed. The Grey Havens were not merely a port, they were a symbol of finality and release. For the elves, sailing west was no casual voyage, but an echo of the doom of the Noldor, a return from exile and suffering, a chance for peace in the undying lands after centuries of strife. For mortals like Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee, who bore the heavy burden of the One Ring, the Havens represented a rare grace, a reward for suffering wounds that could not be healed in Middle-earth. This gift was granted only to those whose fates were irrevocably bound to the power of the rings, offering them rest in Aman, though they remained mortal still. But what lies beyond the Grey Havens? Tolkien describes the straight road as a mystical path unseen by mortal eyes. After the downfall of Númenor in Sayas 3,319, the world was bent and Valinor was removed from the circles of the mortal world. Accessible only through this hidden path, only the elves, and those granted special grace, could take this final journey westward. The journey was not merely geographical, it was spiritual. A metaphor for release from the sorrows of Middle-earth and a reunion with the light of the two trees that had once bathed Valinor in silver and gold. Throughout the ages, the Grey Havens witnessed the departure of many great figures. Galadriel, bearer of Nenya, left Middle-earth from these shores after the defeat of Sauron in 3019 of the Third Age. Alongside her went Elrond of Rivendell and Gandalf, who bore Narya, the Ring of Fire. And then there was Frodo, whose suffering left scars too deep for healing, even in the Shire. His bittersweet farewell at the Havens marked the true end of the Third Age, as the last echoes of the elves' time in Middle-earth faded with the passing of the White Ships. The Grey Havens were more than a mere port. They were a place where time seemed to hesitate, caught between the fading light of Middle-earth and the timeless serenity of the undying lands. The very air of Mythland was thick with memory and melancholy, as if every wave lapping against its shores carried whispers of ages long past. Círdan the Shipwright, guardian of the Havens, remained ever watchful, his beard silver with wisdom and his eyes reflecting the sorrow of ages. He was gifted foresight beyond any other elf, a gift that allowed him to perceive the long ebb of history and the inevitability of all farewells. It was Círdan who passed Narya, the Ring of Fire, to Gandalf upon the wizard's arrival from Valinor, knowing that Mithrandir's flame would be needed to inspire hope in the hearts of mortals and resist the shadow of Sauron. The emotional weight of the Grey Havens is perhaps best captured in that final moment from The Lord of the Rings, when Frodo, having borne the crushing burden of the One Ring, bids farewell to Sam, Merry, and Pippin. There is a deep sorrow in that parting, for it is not merely the end of an adventure, but the end of an age, the closing of a chapter not only for the Fellowship, but for all of Middle-earth. Frodo's departure in 3021 of the Third Age marked the last voyage of the Ring-Bearers across the sea, symbolizing a release from pain that could never fully heal within mortal lands. His wounds were more than physical, they were spiritual echoes of the darkness he had endured. And yet, the Havens were not only a place of sorrow but of profound hope. For the elves, departing from Mithlond meant returning home, an end to exile and the weariness of ages spent in the mortal world. This longing for the undying lands, known as the Sea Longing or Uli, stirred in the hearts of many elves, especially those who had once seen the light of Valinor. The call of the sea was irresistible for those who had dwelt long in Middle-earth, especially after witnessing so much loss and shadow. Even Legolas, who had resisted this pull for so long, eventually succumbed to it after Aragorn's death in 4th Age 120, setting sail with Gimli, who was granted a rare grace by the Valar, an unprecedented honor for a dwarf. The idea of the Straight Road itself holds deep metaphysical weight within Tolkien's legendarium. After the cataclysmic fall of Númenor in SS 319, the world was reshaped from flat to round, and Aman was removed from the circles of the world, no longer reachable by ordinary means. Yet, for the elves and those blessed by the Valar, the Straight Road remained a hidden path that led westward, out of the mortal world's curvature. It was as if the elves, beings of both Arda and beyond, were granted the ability to slip through the very fabric of the world to return to the Blessed Realm. This concept, rooted deeply in Tolkien's Catholic faith, symbolized a transcendence of mortal sorrow and a reunion with divine grace. But what of those who remained? The Havens stood as a lingering reminder of endings not taken, of the choice to remain in Middle-earth, bound to its fate and the fading of the elder days. For mortals, there was no return from the west. Those who stayed behind carried the burden of memory. Samwise Gamgee, though he lived many years after Frodo's departure, was said to have sailed west himself in 4th Age 61, after the death of his beloved Rosie Cotton. Having once borne the One Ring, even if for a brief moment Sam was granted the same grace as Frodo, his passing was the quiet closing of a door, the final echo of the Fellowship's great burden. The Grey Havens, in their quiet dignity, embodied the bitter-sweet nature of endings, where joy and sorrow intertwine. Every ship that set sail from those white shores was more than wood and sail. It was a vessel of memory, carrying the weight of ages and the burdens of hearts too heavy for Middle-earth. For those who departed, it was a release from weariness, a return to peace and the light of the Blessed Realm. For those who remained, it was a farewell that left the world a little dimmer, as if the sun itself mourned the loss of those who had passed beyond the horizon. Yet, this was the natural order of Arda, a world where beauty and loss were forever entwined, and where every journey's end echoed with the sadness of things fading. Círdan, the eternal warden of Mithlond, remained steadfast, even as the last of his kin sailed away. His purpose was not tied to glory or great deeds, but to the humble, sacred duty of seeing others home. His was the role of the quiet sentinel, the keeper of the final threshold between Arda and Aman. It is said that Círdan lingered in Middle-earth longer than nearly any other elf, only taking the Straight Road himself after the last ship had sailed, ensuring that no soul bound for Valinor was left behind. His departure likely came deep into the 4th Age, after the fading of all things elven from the world of men. The sea itself holds deep symbolic power in Tolkien's legendarium. It represents not only physical distance, but also a metaphysical separation between the mortal world and the eternal. The waves of the sundering seas are not mere waters, but barriers of fate and time. To sail west was to transcend the mortal realm, an echo of Tolkien's own reflections on death and immortality. For elves, it was a return to the divine harmony of Valinor. For mortals, it was a grace seldom granted, a rare release from the shadow of mortality. The sea's call was not always gentle. For those who yearned for it yet could not take the voyage, like the men of Numenor before their fall, it could be a torment, driving them to ruinous ambition and despair. The straight road, hidden from mortal sight, was not merely a physical path, but a spiritual journey, one that signified the ultimate release from the burdens of Middle-earth. When Frodo stepped aboard that final ship, he was not simply leaving behind friends and the Shire. He was departing from the pain that had marked his soul since his time bearing the One Ring. His journey, like those of Bilbo, Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel, was an act of healing, a passage into a realm where time itself was different, where the weariness of mortal toil could finally be soothed by the undying light of the two trees reflected in the skies of Valinor. And yet, for those left behind, Sam, Merry, Pippin, and all the peoples of Middle-earth, the Havens became a place of legend and longing. The memory of those white ships vanishing into the western sky lingered in the hearts of the free peoples, a reminder of all that was lost with the passing of the elves. As the Fourth Age dawned, the world of men rose to prominence, but the magic of the elder days remained only in memory and song. The Havens stood as the last remnant of an age when the world was younger and more filled with wonder, a silent sentinel over the sea, watching as time wore on and the light of the Eldar faded into myth. The enduring legacy of the Grey Havens lies not only in the departures it witnessed, but in what those farewells represented: the passing of an era and the waning of magic in the world. As the elves sailed west, so too did the last remnants of the elder days slip from Middle-earth, leaving men to inherit the dominion of the world. Yet, though the age of elves and great heroes had ended, their stories remained etched into the very fabric of the land, carried by the winds across the hills of Eriador, whispered in the leaves of Lothlorien's fading Malorn trees, and remembered in the songs of Gondor and Rohan. By the time of the Fourth Age, the Grey Havens stood as a silent testament to all that had come before, a place untouched by the passage of time, where the sea still sang the old songs of Valinor. Few visited it then, for the elves had passed into legend, and men had turned their hearts to the affairs of the world of stone and earth. Yet it is said that even as the ages wore on, the memory of Mithlond never fully faded. In quiet moments, perhaps by the shores of Belfalas or the White Mountains, sailors and dreamers alike might still feel the pull of that ancient longing, stirred by the sound of waves crashing against distant shores. The idea of Ambar Meta, or the end of the world in Quenya, echoes through the fate of the Havens. Tolkien wove into his legendarium a deep meditation on mortality and the inevitable fading of all things. The elves, though immortal within the bounds of Ardar, carried the burden of endless memory and the sorrow of witnessing the decay of the world they loved. The Havens, then, became not just a place of departure, but a symbol of the elves' final submission to the passage of time, accepting that even the most enduring beauty must eventually give way to change. Yet, there was one last grace left for those who remained loyal to the old bonds of friendship and love. Samwise Gamgee, the steadfast heart of the Fellowship, was granted a place on that final ship because of the burden he once bore, brief though it was. His journey westward in Fourth Age 61 was not merely a reward, but a recognition of his quiet heroism, his sacrifice, and the purity of his heart. It is said that in the Undying Lands he found peace and rest, reunited in spirit with Frodo, and perhaps even glimpsed the light of the two trees that had long been hidden from mortal sight. In the end, the Grey Havens are more than a farewell. They are a reflection of Tolkien's deepest themes: the sorrow of parting, the beauty of sacrifice, and the bittersweet grace of endings. They embody the heartache of Estel, the Elvish word for hope, a hope that endures even in the face of inevitable loss. Every ship that sailed from Mithlond carried not just elves or mortals, but the weight of history itself. And though those who remained behind would never again see their loved ones, the memory of those final voyages lived on in song and legend, as enduring as the sea and as boundless as the stars above Ardad Dot. The final legacy of the Grey Havens is not found in the stone of its harbors, or the ships that once sailed from its shores, but in the echoes left behind, in the songs sung by the elves, in the stories passed down by men, and in the lingering memory of those who witnessed the fading of the firstborn. The havens became a symbol of closure, not of despair but of acceptance, a reminder that all things must pass, and even the most enduring beauty must one day surrender to time's gentle but unyielding hand. And yet, within that sorrow lay the heart of Tolkien's deepest truth, that endings are not to be feared, for they give meaning to all that came before. In the quiet that followed the departure of the last ship, Middle-earth was left to the dominion of men. The Fourth Age marked the beginning of a new era, an age of change and mortal ambition. The echoes of the elves and their ancient wisdom faded into myth, yet the memory of their passing endured in hidden corners of the world. In Gondor, the White Tree stood as a symbol of that ancient light, while in the Shire, the stories of Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin became legends whispered by firelight, their deeds growing ever brighter in the telling. And so the Grey Havens remained, a place untouched by the march of time, standing as a silent guardian over the sea. Perhaps, in the stillness of the waves, one could still imagine the white sails on the horizon, carrying beloved souls into the west. The image of those ships gliding toward a distant light became more than a memory. It was a promise of peace beyond sorrow, a reminder that beyond the circles of the world there is something eternal, something pure and untouched by the decay of Arda. This was Tolkien's greatest gift, the assurance that even in the face of loss, there is hope unbroken. For those who remain in Middle-earth, the havens offer a quiet consolation. The sea's gentle rhythm speaks of journeys yet to come, of the unending cycle of beginnings and endings. And while the elves no longer walk beneath the stars of Middle-earth, their legacy lingers in every glimmer of starlight, in every whisper of wind across the hills. The memory of the Grey Havens endures, not as a place of sorrow, but as a threshold of peace, where farewells are spoken, but love remains unbroken, carried across the sundering seas by the waves themselves. In the end, as Tolkien himself reflected through his writings, the Grey Havens symbolize more than just departure. They represent the grace of letting go, the quiet beauty of finality, and the enduring hope that all sorrows will one day be healed. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the circles of the world, on shores bathed in light undimmed by time, the Fellowship gathers once more, free from the burdens of the mortal world, their laughter echoing across the timeless seas of Valinor. This is the true gift of the Grey Havens, not an end, but the beginning of a peace that shall never fade. Thank you for joining this journey through the final shores of Middle-earth. May the light of Eärendil shine upon your path always.